Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning the world, from Hamas to ISIS to Iran, Islamic radicals want to conquer us all.
In his powerful speech at the United Nations, Netanyahu said Israel's fight is the world's fight. But as Chris Mitchell reports, he also sees positive signs of a new alignment coming together in the Middle East.
Throughout his speech, Netanyahu warned the world of the rise of militant Islam.
Everywhere we look, militant Islam is on the march.
Some felt Netanyahu's address harkened back to the warnings of England's Winston Churchill. In the 20th century, Churchill warned about the totalitarian threat of Hitler's Nazi fascism. Now in the 21st century, Netanyahu says the threat is militant Islam.
Militant Islam's ambition to dominate the world seems mad. But so too did the global ambitions of another fanatic ideology that swept into power 8 decades ago. The Nazis believed in a master race. The militant Islamists believe in a master faith.
Netanyahu said militant Islam in all its forms, from Hamas to ISIS, share the same ideology.
They all seek to create ever-expanding enclaves of militant Islam, where there is no freedom and no tolerance, where women are treated as chattel, Christians are decimated, and minorities are subjugated, sometimes given the stark choice: convert or die.
While Netanyahu agreed ISIS presents a clear and present danger, the greater threat, he says, is a nuclear Iran.
ISIS must be defeated. But to defeat ISIS and leave Iran as a threshold nuclear power is to win the battle and lose the war.
In the midst of these dangers, Netanyahu noted a new alignment with Arab countries is forming in the Middle East, an alliance that offers hope for peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
And therefore, to achieve that peace, we must look not only to Jerusalem and Ramallah, but also to Cairo, to Amman, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and elsewhere.
Netanyahu ended his speech with the scripture from the book of Isaiah about the need to speak truth in an age of lies for the sake of Jerusalem.
For the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. For the sake of Jerusalem, I will not be still, until her justice shines bright and her salvation glows like a flaming torch.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Magnificent speech. Now, you probably, I don't know, a lot of people watch 60 Minutes on Sunday night, and there was interviews Steve Croft had with the president, and the president was asked about his understanding of ISIS. He said, well, I had a failure from my intelligence community. Well, the intelligence community is up in arms because they said, you know, he's just lying. Now the facts are out, apparently, and I don't want to overstate it, but the president only listens to his daily briefing about 42% of the time. I think that number is about correct. It's in that 42-3% range. The rest of the time, he doesn't get briefed personally. Now, this is where the intelligence, where he can ask questions, where he can drill down to what he's finding. And he says, well, he gets probably a one-page report or something. We don't know what he gets. But he's had plenty of warning about what was happening in the Middle East. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, as you were saying, President Obama had accurate intelligence information about ISIS before his 2012 re-election. That's what a White House source told the UK Daily Mail. The national security staffer, who is familiar with the content of intelligence briefings, said unless someone very senior had been shredding the president's daily briefings and telling him that the dog ate them, highly accurate predictions about ISIL had been showing up in the Oval Office since before the 2012 election. The source says the intelligence community was sending specific threat assessments, and many of them have panned out exactly as predicted. Meanwhile, a new Government Accountability Institute report shows that President Obama has missed more than half of his daily intelligence briefings while in office. A second beheading scare is sending shockwaves through Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma newspaper reports a nursing home fired Jacob Mungabi Marithi after a female coworker accused him of threatening to cut her head off with a blade. The 30-year-old man reportedly told her he represented ISIS and talked about killing Christians. A county attorney says, quote, "We take these threats very seriously." Marithi remains in a county jail with bail set at $1 million, and as of now, there is no link between this incident and the beheading last week and more. Pat?
You know, it was said just the other day that all Muslims are not terrorists. There's no question about it. But there is no terrorism that we have seen in recent years that does not involve Muslims. Every single one has some Muslim connection. And as we have shown you before, this isn't an aberration. It is deeply embedded in the teachings of the leader or the founder of the Islamic religion. It is definitely in what he had to say. He said to besiege them. He said to cut off their heads. He cut off their hands and their feet. There's no question. That's what he was told. He's told his followers, and they read that. They think it's a message from God Almighty, and therefore they're free to practice these barbaric practices. That's the way it is. So again, I am appalled, as you should be appalled, that we have a man in the White House who's so disengaged he doesn't know what's going on because he will not take time to listen to his advisors who have warned him. Then he comes up and says, well, I didn't know that was happening. Well, where are you? Are you on the golf course? Are you on another fundraiser in Hollywood raising money from your left-wing buddies? Where are you, John?
Pat, the armed man who recently jumped a White House fence posed an even greater threat to presidential security than originally thought. New revelations have surfaced indicating the intruder penetrated deep into the White House residence. Gary Lane has more.
This is the cell phone video that went viral. A man jumps the White House fence and races across the lawn to the front door. Strangely, the door was unlocked. Members of the media were told he was quickly apprehended just inside. But now the Secret Service reveals the suspect actually overpowered a guard and made it past the stairway leading to the first family living quarters. He then headed to the East Room of the White House. That's where he was finally tackled by an agent, a total of 168 feet inside the White House.
He got deep enough that had the president, the vice president, or any other number of individuals been walking the hallways, they could have been attacked by Mr. Gonzalez.
Fortunately, the president and his family were not in the White House at the time. Initially, the Secret Service said suspect Omar Gonzalez was unarmed. The next day, they revealed Gonzalez had carried a 3.5-inch knife. 800 rounds of ammunition, a machete, and 2 hatchets were later found in his car. And this incident apparently wasn't the first time in the Obama presidency where the Secret Service demonstrated lax security. The Washington Post reports agents did not respond immediately when shots were fired at the White House in 2011. One of those bullets actually broke a glass window on the 3rd floor of the executive mansion. House Oversight Committee Chairman Darrell Issa suggests the head of the Secret Service will have a lot of explaining to do when she testifies before Congress.
The basics of the White House, locking the doors, having compartmental security, appears to have failed. And it failed because of the human element headed by the Secret Service.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
The Chinese government is refusing to back down despite the huge pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. The dispute centers on the territory's first direct elections. Communist leaders say they won't reverse their decision to screen candidates based on their patriotism to China. Protesters in the Asian financial hub have launched their 5th day of sit-ins blocking main highways. On Sunday, police used tear gas to disperse the crowds. Now, some are concerned ongoing protests could affect Asia's financial markets. But protesters passed a peaceful night Monday as crowds sang anthems calling for freedom and for Hong Kong's current leader to resign. The United States is known for liberty, but more and more students are having their religious liberty trampled on at public schools. Paul Strand tells us about one of the latest incidents and how the Supreme Court ruling that almost always wins these cases for the students.
Brooks Hamby was rewarded for his excellent grades and record with the honor of giving a speech at his high school graduation in small-town Brawley, California. But as he and the Liberty Institute lawyers representing him told CBN News at the Values Voter Summit, his school forced Brooks to rewrite the speech over and over again because administrators didn't like his plans to talk about his faith and God in it.
They told me that if I proceeded to give that speech, that the mic would be cut. Finally, on the third draft, they ended up just blacking out any reference to God or faith, and that was in my speech.
It's egregious that the school would say, no, you can't give the speech that you want to give. This is his only time to give a salutatorian speech, and they denied him that right on 3 separate occasions.
But on advice from his pastor, family, and friends, Hamby boldly went ahead and referred to his faith, God, and the Bible.
The school didn't cut the mic off, although I was told that they had their finger on the mute button the entire time, ready to push it whenever it was needed.
Still, for all his troubles, Liberty Institute demanded justice for Hamby from his school.
Once we sent that demand letter and said, look, you need to apologize for what you've done here, they had the audacity to send us back a 10-page lecture that says not only can we censor his religious liberty in his speech, we are required to censor his religious liberty.
But if this should end up in a court, a judge would almost certainly cite the Supreme Court's 1969 Tinker case in saying Hamby's religious rights must be respected.
What's ironic is that the case lawyers most often quote in defense of religious liberty for students actually had nothing to do with religious liberty at all. It was about the right of students protesting the Vietnam War to wear black armbands in school.
Kelly Shackelford, head of the Liberty Institute, writes in supreme irony about the Tinker case and the brave kids who in the mid-60s faced punishment and derision just for wearing those anti-war armbands after their Des Moines, Iowa schools forbade it. Their case ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court. In siding with the students, Justice Abe Fortas plainly stated,
neither teachers nor students shed their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. And that is that when you come to school, even a public school, you still have a right to express your opinion.
Shackelford named his book Supreme Irony because it was the Iowa Civil Liberties Union, an affiliate of the ACLU, that fought for and won the rights protected by the Tinker ruling, even though today's ACLU often opposes some of those rights.
I think if they would have known that this opened, the floodgates for actually religious freedom being protected in the school, they would have had second thoughts, because even now there are cases that come up. For instance, if a student wants to wear a T-shirt that disagrees with homosexuality, the ACLU refuses to help that student.
Some say schools should be an exception because of the need for discipline and order. Shackelford agrees, but just a little.
Now, you don't have a right to stand up in the middle of math class and give an oratory speech, but everybody has a right under the First Amendment. They don't lose that because they're on a government sidewalk or they're at a government school or anything like that. In fact, those areas are areas where it's the most fully protected.
Still, the message from what happened to Brooks Hamby just this June is lovers of liberty must be ever vigilant.
I was pretty stunned that something like this could, happen even in little old Brawley, California. So if it can happen in Brawley, it certainly can happen anywhere else.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Values Voter Summit.
A bold and courageous young man taking a stand for his faith. Pat?
There was a case called Mergens versus West Side School District, and this was a 7-2 decision of the Supreme Court written by one of the most liberal members. It was argued by none other than Jay Sekulow of the American Center for Law and Justice. It was a smashing win for religious freedom and an affirmation of the fact that students had a complete right to express their faith in the schoolhouse, to give out tracts, to proselytize, to talk to other people about their faith, and they could not be restrained from doing it. But I tell you, the schools are really bad on some of these areas. They have absorbed something that came out of Teachers College in Columbia, at Columbia University, and it has infected the educational establishment throughout America, and they're doing everything they can in certain areas to limit the freedom of Christians to express themselves in the schoolhouse. And as that one Tinker case was pointed out, students don't lose their citizenship or their First Amendment rights when they walk through the schoolhouse door. And Morgan's 7-2 decision, a ringing endorsement of the freedom of students. But eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and at the American Center for Law and Justice, we're fighting all the time for the rights of students. Day after day after day, there are cases that come up, and invariably the schools have to back down. And once they're challenged by intelligent appellate lawyers, they'll back down. because they aren't really courageous. They're just anyhow.
Don't you think some of that comes out of their fear of a lawsuit and their lack of funds to support something
Well, that's part
like
of
that?
it, but also it's their own internal belief. They're not deeply committed believers. They're atheists, humanists, whatever term you want to give, and they don't really comport with evangelical religious belief. And so they don't want to support these children.
And for some, a lack of knowledge. Look how many times we hear people talk about the separation of church and state that's in the Constitution.
It's not, the constitutional separation, there's no such thing. But the Supreme Court has gone pretty far. It's way, way, way overdue that they've got to correct this stuff. And they haven't done it yet, but it's going to take another judge. There's a tenuous majority, 5-4, on most issues these days, tending toward a conservative point of view. But that depends on the vote of one judge who can go either way. All right.
Health officials in Dallas are holding a patient in strict isolation for a possible case of Ebola. Officials at Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital say the patient's symptoms and recent travel raise the concerns. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is running tests to confirm Ebola has killed more than 3,000 people in Africa and infected 4 American doctors who traveled to the region. In Florida, atheists get angry when a town sponsors a prayer vigil. The complaints came after the Ocala Police Department's Facebook page posted a letter urging citizens to attend the event. The prayer vigil was meant to unite the community after recent drive-by shootings. But the atheist said it violates the separation of church and state. The town's mayor tells the Ocala Star-Banner they have a First Amendment right to gather and pray. Christians are now responding by holding a prayer walk in Ocala on October 4th. They're calling it God Belongs in My City. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.